This is Java. This is week 10. We are looking at solving exercise number 3 in chapter 5. I'm going to begin by just simply reading the exercise description and trying to make a few determinations as to what tasks we might need to perform. All right, so part A of exercise 3 says, write an application for the Summerdale Condo Sales Office. The program determines the price of a condominium. Ask the user to choose 1 for park view, 2 for golf course view, or 3 for lake view. The output name of the chosen view as well as the price of the condo, the output is, okay, so that's our output. Park view condos are 150,000, condos are 170, and lake views are 210. If the user enters an invalid code, set the price to 0. And save the file as condosales.java. So I'm going to just begin by grabbing that, just the name, so I don't have to type it. But we are going to get user input, right? So that's going to be one thing that we know. So I'm going to jump right into JGrasp here. I've already created a new file. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create the public class, although it should be spelled correctly. And we're going to call it condo sales. I'm going to get my opening and closing curly brackets. And we know we want this to execute right away, so we're going to do a public static void main string, some args, kind of like that. All right, I'm going to put in opening and closing curly brackets here as well. And then we can start to do some coding. So we're going to need to create some variables, obviously. We are also going to need to do user input. And since we know we're going to do user input, why don't we start by putting in the library we need to do that. So that one is import Java util scanner with a capital S. And that one should be fairly familiar to you by now. Okay, back to the problem description. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and save this right now. My logic for that is just to get the name locked in there, so it goes right to condosales.java. So back to our problem description, and I'm just going to read this again. We're determining the price of a condominium, and we're asking the user to choose one of 3 values. So they're going to enter 1, 2, or 3. So why don't we go ahead and set up the scanner input to receive those values. Okay, so that's actually going to begin by doing a little bit of a prompt. So since we're going to ask the users for input, I'm going to do a system out and print line, and we're just going to add. Now I could ask them to enter 1, 2, or 3, but they don't know what they're entering 1, 2, or 3 for yet, right? So what we need to put in place here is, maybe we'll do a number of different things. So we're going to ask them to select condo type. Okay, so that's just going to be text. Then I'm going to do a fresh line. And here I'm just going to give them basically information. So I'm going to say 1 equals park view. Now I know that other people might do this differently, but this is how I'm doing it. And there's not necessarily a right or wrong as long as it comes out to the right result. and the second one is 2, and that one is for golf course view. And 3, oops, is for lake view. And then one more time, what we're going to do is we're going to do another output, and we're going to say enter selection 1, 2, or 3. And we can do a little bit of a prompt there. All right, so far, let's actually, even though it's kind of premature, I suppose, let's go ahead and save this. And I'm going to do a compile really quick. And then I'm going to run it. I just want to see what it looks like on the screen, if that's going to be clear. That's pretty clear, I think. What do you think? Okay. What I might actually do is I'm going to add a couple of spaces here. Save it. Let's run it one more time. I just want to have an output that is clear to read. So to me, that works okay. So now that we have our messages out on the screen, the next thing that we want to do is we actually want to grab the input. So that we're going to do with our scanner. And we are going to type, first we need to create a scanner instance. You can call it whatever you want. Should we call it choice? Sounds good to me too. And it, and honestly, it doesn't have to be uppercase. In fact, let's make it lowercase. Scanner choice equals new scanner system.in. Oh, and one thing that we want to be aware of, since the user is going to end up here to type in the thing, instead of having a print line here at the end, I'm going to switch that to print so that the cursor is waiting basically right here. Otherwise, it would go to the next line. All right, so I got rid of the ln right there. All right, so the next line that we want to do is we want to actually grab the value and put it in somewhere. So we're going to say, well, all right, let's think about this very carefully here. We also need whatever value we're going to grab, we need to put it somewhere. So we're going to need to create a variable for that. So why don't we create a variable up here, let's call it selection. And since we're working with numbers, we're going to just say selection. And do we need to give it a value right away? No, it doesn't really matter. All right, so now that we have that created, we can say selection equals, and whatever we call that, choice dot next int. All right, so that's going to grab what we type, 1, 2, or 3, and then that's going to place it inside this variable, which is an integer called selection. All right, so once we have that, then we can start to do the rest of the work. So, so what are the possibilities? If somebody sits at the keyboard, what are the possibilities for data entry? One would be 1, 2, 3 or something else. Okay, so there's 3 valid choices and a whole bunch of invalid ones. So we're going to have to code so that we accommodate for those. All right. So since we know that 1 equals Parkview, 2 equals golf course, and 3 equals Lakeview, we can just very simply test for each one of those one at a time. Now, I'm actually going to think about this here for a second. I'm trying to think of an efficient way to break down the logic. If I were to actually use a tool to do some flow charting, we used to use a program for some of our programming classes called Visual Logic, and I don't think I have that loaded anymore. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bring up PowerPoint and use some of the diagramming tools that are built into it. And you can see all these little icons up here. That basically is just going to help me draw out the logic, kind of like what you were seeing in the book where they were creating a flow chart. So that's actually my goal here, is to kind of mimic that, because I think it will help you to see things a bit more clearly. So I'm just gonna draw a box in here, and I'm just gonna type inside there get choice. All right. And then I'm just going to make a little arrow so you can see how quick and easy this is. And then once I have the choice, we're going to check it. So we do that. They have a special little symbol here for decisions, right? What shape do they use? A diamond, right? All right. And I know that's not in perfect position. But basically our logic here is we're going to check each one at a time. So we're going to say if 1, which equals park, so I'm just going to say if park, all right, then on the true side of that, you see all these little lines they have here? I'm going to kind of keep it simple. So this would be the true side. If it's park, what's the result? All right. The output is the name of the chosen view as well as the price of the condo. So if I choose park, I'm going to do an output. The output's going to say output. Actually, it's not even typed. I'm going to do it really simplistic. I'm going to say Parkview, and then we'll just put in the dollar amount, 150K. Totally abbreviated. You'll keep in mind that this, right in the program, is not quite this easy, but it's the logic that counts. And the other thing that you'd probably want to do is do a little snippet of text here and say true. Okay, and you can do this all with pencil and paper, so please keep that in mind, that you don't have to do it the way I'm doing it. Okay, so if it's true, they chose Parkview, and then we're done, right? Okay. If it's not true, then we have another decision to make. What's the next decision? Okay. But aside from an invalid one, we can also say if golf, so I'm abbreviating, and then in that case, and watch how nifty this is, I can copy all those things at once. In fact, if I'm a little more ambitious about it, I can get that one too. Just copy, paste, and I'm just going to change the output here. And what's the price on that one, Kelly? 70. Otherwise, if it's false, then we do another decision, which is going to be kind of a mimic of this. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I can copy all of this. And the last one is lake, right? Lakeview. Isn't that pretty? And that one's like 200 something. 210. Otherwise, the option is basically, what did you say that? We set it to 0 and say invalid choice or something like that. So we could say, oops, invalid, something like that. So that's our logic. All right. Now with these up here, if of course nothing happens, everything's going to basically terminate. So you just consider, normally I would put in like a little box that says end program or something like that. But all of these would point to that. So I would do something like that. All right. So that's kind of the basic idea. That's our logic structure. So if you want to read into how we would do this, you could say, if it's park, great. If not, then if it's golf, great. Right? Else, if it's lake, or is that another if? See, here's the question. And the fun part about this is that really you can structure the logic a number of different ways. We can also use a switch statement here to make it work. So let's try the first approach, and that is what I'm going to consider the simplest approach. And I'm going to leave this up here just from a logic standpoint. We can come back and look to it to make sure we cover our bases. So back to JGrasp. And now we're going to start writing our if statement. So that's all our input and setup there. And we're going to say if, and what are we going to say? If selection is what? Okay, so 1 would be Parkview. Let's put in our curly brackets here. Then we're going to say, we can do our output directly from here. Or, there's a couple different ways we can do it. My inclination is to do it in the simplest possible way. So I would just do something like, so we need a capital S there. Let's see, you selected Parkview. And what's a good way to say it? You selected Parkview, the cost is and that's one way to do it. Now, if you were writing something that was a little bit more complex, what I might actually do is set up a couple of variables, one for the selection and one for the price, and then just use one output statement to cover them all. So you would set a variable and then output that variable. But since it's only basically 3 or actually 4 choices, we really don't need to go to that kind of trouble. So The reality is I don't really even need the curly brackets here because I'm only going to do one output statement. But what I am going to do is I'm going to do an else if selection is equivalent to 2. I'm just going to copy and paste. Oops, selected. We said 170 for that. And then once again, we're going to do a little copy paste. And this one is Lakeview. Oops, Lakeview. And really, if we want to do proper English here, it's really we have 2 sentences. Doesn't matter for testing, but whenever you're going to do actually something for production, you want to make sure all your spelling and grammar is correct. All right, and there's one other scenario that's possible, and that is what? Yeah, and we don't actually need to even say if in that scenario, because if it's 1, we do Parkview. If it's 2, we do Golf. If it's 3, we do Lake. If it's something else, doesn't matter what it is, we're just going to do an output And if you want to have proper English here, I suppose we should have periods at the end of our sentences. All right. Now, I think we are okay. I think that covers every scenario. Yeah, it's a little too simple, right? All right. So let's test this now. Let's go ahead and save. Let's compile. Oh, we got a little bit of a problem here somewhere. Oh, what are we missing here? Now, I made that mistake just to test you guys, just so you know. Everybody makes mistakes. All right. Compile. No errors. We're going to run it. So it's select condo type. So I'm going to put in 1. Good. Run it again. Let's put in 2. Run again. Put in 3. One more time. And put in something else. Oh, I didn't like that. Did it. So what it's telling you is it does not like you putting in something that's not numeric. Okay. Let's run it again, and I'll just put in 4. Okay. And that's adequate to make the program work. And all right, so let's call that one complete. Of course, there's other ways you can accomplish it, but I think that that's a really efficient, concise way that works well. All right, so let's call that a wrap on that one. All right, we're going to continue on to part B of exercise 3 here in chapter 5. And this one says, add a prompt to the condo sales application to ask the user to specify 1, garage, or 2, parking space, but only if the condo's view selection is valid. So in other words, you can select a garage or a parking space only if you chose correctly on the first part. So think about the logic there, because really now we're going to kind of extend our diagram, right? So instead of going to end of program, now we're going to actually ask them, all right, and I'm going to truncate this a little bit and you'll see why. Okay, so if they chose one of the 3 options correctly, it will then do the following. We'll say get, I'm trying to think of a good way to say this. How about this? Parking or garage. All right. Maybe the better way to say it is choose parking or garage. All right. So they'll get a prompt. And then based upon that, we will allow them to do the next thing. So let's do this. What happens if the choice is not valid? Well, you're done, right? Can we agree on that? Okay. So if the choice is not valid, the program is done. So really what would happen is this would just fall all the way to wherever the bottom is. Now, if it is a valid choice from one of these 3, then we're going to ask to choose parking or garage, in which case, and I'm going to have to do a little bit of creative drawing here. So I don't want to do it that way. I'm just going to have a line that comes back up, and then I'm going to copy some of this stuff. And here we're going to say if garage Now, for some people, they can jump right into the code and get the logic, and it's no problem. That's not always true for everybody, so don't feel bad if you have to diagram things. And really, I'm making the drawing, and then as I'm doing it, I'm going, no, that's not right either. Because really, we don't want to come out the side. We want to go all the way to the top. Because you would imagine this piece that it would be underneath here if we had the space. Something like that. All right, so if it's a garage, what would we do? Add $5,000. Add 5K to total. Something like that. Is that what we would output? No, we would do the math internally. If it's not true, then we would do whatever the second option is. Okay, so apparently if there's no garage chosen, there's no additional price, and basically we're done at that point. Right. Well, basically what happens in that scenario, so these arrows here that drop off the bottom, those are programs done. So if one of these 3 conditions is true, then we can say choose parking or garage. If they choose a garage, we add 5,000. Otherwise, we don't have to do anything. Okay. If you make an invalid choice, you don't get to choose the garage, because what's the point? Okay? So this is really a pretty simple little addition. So we could do this a couple different ways. One, probably the easiest way I can think of, is we kind of leave our work alone. I mean, this part already works, okay? All right. Following this if statement, I might do another thing like this, where I'm going to copy it, and let's see, what would be good verbiage here? Add condo with garage or without? Add one for garage, or press 1 for garage, or 2 for parking space. And, you know, as I'm doing this, I always think, oh, I should do this too. All right, so here's my brain thinking in that mode. Because it's kind of simplistic, I guess, to just say that. Just press 1 for this and that, this for that. So I'm going to say, okay, so let's think about this really carefully. If it's an invalid choice, they shouldn't get asked any of this stuff. So the way I'm typing up right now, they would. All right. So regardless of that fact, though, so I'm going to put a little code around it. And I'm just going to put will need to be nested somewhere. We'll figure that out. Okay. But let's get the logic of this part typed up. Okay. So what I'll say is choose parking type. Select, the thing we did before. One equals garage. And we might say and these should all be print lines, folks. And don't worry, we'll do the cleanup on this. Am I doing these in the right order? That's the question. 1 garage or 2 parking space. And enter selection. All right. Question is, can I use the same input? No reason why not. All right. So this is the logic And what I'm going to do to test the logic is I'm actually going to go ahead and run it. So even if I get an invalid response, it will simulate something, except I have another issue here, don't I? I don't have a way to do the output. So here I am saying that I wasn't going to create extra variables, but now I'm going to do that. So I'm actually going to create a variable for, let's see, let's call it int price. All right. And then I'm going to do this. Let's create, I'm just trying to think of the most efficient way to say this. All right. So if it's park view, see, this part actually works okay. But if we're going to do some math, and that's really kind of the intention here, we really need a variable to work with. So we can actually set up some constants. So we could say final int, and we'll just say park equals 150,000. And we're going to do park golf equals 170, comma, and really, let me tell you what convention I'm breaking here. Because I'm saying final, that means it's a constant. It's not going to change. These, the convention is that we name the things with uppercase letters. So, and then park, golf, and lake. Okay, so we got 3 of those. And now that's going to force us to change these. So here I'm going to type in park, but I do have to remember that I have to concatenate, right? You know what, I'm not going to worry about the punctuation there. So I'm just going to kind of copy this little format. Hopefully this is making sense to you so far. Now, let's say that they actually do a selection here. So whatever the selection is, so really I can add another constant, and that would be for garage. So I'm just going to say garage. 5,000. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to check at this point, and we're going to say if selection is 1, again, then what are we going to do? Well, first thing we're going to do is we're going to add 5,000 to the price, right? And since we're going to be doing math to put stuff into price, it's probably a good idea to set it to 0 to start with. In this case, park, okay, so here, now watch what we're going to have to do here to make this work. Now, if I select park view, we're going to output 150,000. But in order to add the garage price to it, we need to put that 150,000 into the price variable so we can get our total. So maybe even better than the word price would be total. All right. So what I'm going to do here now is we're going to take these if statements, and instead of having one statement inside of it, which requires us to, or doesn't require us to have curly brackets, I'm actually going to add the curly brackets so I can do this. I'm going to say total equals park. All right, so we're not adding anything, we're just taking this value and putting it into total. So then we're going to do the same thing for the rest of these, and hopefully that makes sense to you. So here we're going to say total equals golf. Close our curlies. Do that again. And here we're going to say total equals lake. Otherwise, invalid choice. Okay. Now, we still have to, and I'm going to put in my little disclaimer here, this is not correct quite yet down here. But the next step is going to be that we ask, but only if this isn't the case. Okay, so now we can do that a couple of different ways, but let's take care of the math here. So the one thing that we're going to do, we're going to say is if selection equals 1, what's going to be the result of that? Well, we might put out a message that says something like this: you selected, so let's do that, you selected garage. Okay, you selected garage. That's going to add $5,000 to the price. So we actually have to do a little bit of math probably beforehand, and we should say total equals total, whatever we added in, so whether it's golf, park, or lake, plus garage, which is 5,000. Now we could hard code this, but there's a lot of reasons why you shouldn't. And one would be that if the price of the garage changes, you change it in one spot instead of a bunch of spots. All right, so it would be total plus garage. You selected garage. Otherwise, we can do an else. And these are multiple statements here, so we're going to need curly brackets. There and there. Otherwise, we're not going to add anything to it, right? And so we're just going to throw out the message here. You selected parking space. And then that if statement's done. And then we would just do an output that said something to the effect of we're going to do an output of some sort. We'll say, how about your total cost and that reminds me we should really put dollar signs here too. All right, now the question is, how do we keep this code from executing? In fact, really all of this code, we need to keep all of this code from executing if we have an invalid selection. So there's a couple different ways to do it. One is to completely restructure the if statement, which we don't want to do. Or we can set up another variable. So we could, inside this if statement, and you see I didn't close out this one. And this is one of a few ways to do it, so please keep that in mind. The fun part of doing like programming logic is sometimes there's multiple ways to accomplish the same thing, and you may have done it differently. But we could potentially just set up a Boolean, right? So we could say, what's the keyword for Boolean? Is that right? I assure you most people don't. All right, so we're going to set up the Boolean value here, and let's just call that invalid. That's going to be the name of it. And we're going to set that to true. All right. So then in order to keep this next part from executing, we are actually going to set up another if statement that will encapsulate all of it. So knowing that I'm going to encapsulate it, I'm going to actually indent all of this one level. And I'm just going to type up an if invalid is what? Yeah, and there's a few different ways we can do this too. There's also the negation operator. How do you negate something? I'll let you guys ponder that. Here, let's do a little reverse logic here. And I'm like, I have all these thoughts here as I go into it. I'm actually not going to declare this variable here, because if it doesn't get to this point, it will never trigger. So I'm actually going to declare it up here. So I'm going to say Boolean valid. I'm going to set that to true. Now watch what I do here. Valid is preset to true. And this is a beautiful, simple little syntax, right? If I set it valid to false, it won't trigger. But if it's valid, notice I don't even have to set it equal to true. Should just work. Because if you just state it, then it's implying true. If valid, we throw this part out. Otherwise, the program is done. So I need to make sure that I have my closing curly bracket for the if statement, which is this one. This statement doesn't need a curly bracket because it's a single statement with an else. This is a separate statement. All right, let's give this a shot. See if it works. We're going to take bets. Is it going to work or not? Let's hope it does. All right, so we got a couple of issues here. All right, so it says error, cannot find symbol. Can't find the symbol. True? So what's the problem there? I suppose we've done the thing where we haven't really worked with Booleans all too much in here. Do you see any issues with any of the stuff I'm doing? The one thing that we need to do is we actually need to look at where the problem is. All right, so here it's pointing to line 9, and it's pointing to the letter T. So here's my challenge for you. Find me the valid syntax to declare something as true. I'll give you a few moments. Okay, Kelly here is telling me that it's all small letters, so let's give that a shot. All right. Now, if that is actually the case, and it seems like it might be because see how it changed color? I'm going to go ahead and save it. Yep. But this way, if I compile it, it should have one less error. All right, so that's an agreement here. So we're going to say false. But notice I'm also kind of demonstrating a technique, because why would you go through and change, let's say if you had 50 true falses in the thing, why would you go through and change all of them if, just fix one, see if it fixes. And voila. Okay. So let's give that a shot and see if it runs with any luck. So we're going to do, it doesn't matter which one, we know that part works. Seems okay? All right, let's check that. Okay, and then let's test the invalid selection. Okay, so it did all the things it's supposed to. Now, if you wanted to make this a little more interactive, and we haven't gotten to the chapter on looping yet, but you guys, I think, understand what a loop is, we can very simply put the whole thing inside of a loop, and then after you're done, you just run the program again, and you don't have to terminate it. But it's working just as we intend, so that's good. So we'll call that a success and wrap that up right here.